What's happening? I'm Ronell Johnson with the Preservation Hall Jazz Band, and you're watching 101.9 KINK Radio in the Skype live studio. Come on now.
What? What? Keep it going. Preservation Hall Jazz Band. Dang. That is infectious. You just took the place up a notch. I hate to be the band that has to follow you guys wherever you go. Let me ask you a question with that last song. Is there ever a bragging right when you come off the stage? Who got the most applause after the solo? Is there a little bit of competition? Jump up on that mic, gentlemen.
We definitely have an MVP every night.
Every night,
yeah. We definitely, we go around giving dap and giving hugs
right.
for the MVP.
Right.
No doubt, we have to acknowledge our drummer, who's never stops back there, Walter Harris. He's back there driving the whole machine, so that's he's the MVP every night.
Every night.
But I'll tell you, Charlie Gabriel brings us all to task every night.
Charlie.
Yeah, and that's really who we're trying to play up to him every night.
Yes.
Yeah. So.
Oh man, well I'll let you make the round. You want to introduce everybody real quick since we're at it?
Absolutely. Down here on my right, this is Mr. Clint Majan on the saxophone. Of course, that's Walter Harris on the drums. This is Brandon Lewis on the trumpet. One and only Mr. Kyle Roussel on the piano. Ronell Johnson on the trombone. And the one and only Mr. Charlie Gabriel on the clarinet and saxophone. And back there on bass, I'm Ben Jaffe. Thank you all so much.
Thank you, Ben.
Yes.
Preservation Hall Jazz Band, for those that aren't familiar, established in 1961 was the hall?
It was, yes. The hall was established in 1961, and it evolved out of a art collective that had taken over a building in the French Quarter of New Orleans and was using this space as gallery rooms and living space, and there was a photo studio and artists living upstairs, and they started organizing jam sessions amongst some of these aging African American musicians, who many of them were alive at the birth of jazz. Mm-hmm. And Preservation Hall grew out of that concept of providing a home for this amazing musical tradition.
What's more fun, being ambassadors for this music and introducing it to a whole new audience, or playing to a hall full of jazz musicians that might know every single note? Because you get, I'm sure, all the above wherever you play.
We get a lot. One of the amazing things about being a member of this band is the spectrum of audiences that we get to perform in front of. Not only do we get to travel all over the world, but we also get to play sort of in non-traditional sort of areas, arenas that the jazz bands like ours don't normally get a chance to perform in. Like, this last week we were at Coachella.
Yes.
And we're going back again. We're playing on the same stage as Radiohead, So that's
I love that.
That's amazing. I think that says a lot about the direction, of some music, at least, today.
You might have seen them in Sonic Highways, the Foo Fighters album and documentary as well, paying tribute to New Orleans and Preservation Hall in particular.
And Portland should be one of the cities if there's ever a...
I like that.
You know what I'm saying?
I like that.
Yeah, Detroit, Portland. There's a lot of cities that I think they left a room open for the next one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I read they were going to go across the pond over to the UK. We'll talk about Foo Fighters later. Let's give
them a call after the show and figure that out.
But this project's been putting out music since 1964. Two original albums, or original compilation albums. The new one comes out this Friday. Give them a round of applause for some new music, a brand new album. How has Preservation Hall Jazz Band evolved over the years? Because it's been since 1964, I believe.
The band's been around since 1961.
61,
and
okay.
The original Preservation Hall band was comprised of, there were actually two versions of the band. There was a version of the band that was led by Sweet Emma Barrett, and if anybody's followed Preservation Hall or New Orleans jazz, you know that name. She's an icon in New Orleans. And the other band was led by a husband and wife, Billy and Dee Dee Pierce. And those were the first original 2 Preservation Hall bands. And from that, there have been different versions of the band over the last 50 years as people age and as the torch is passed on to another generation. New members join the band, and it's amazing in New Orleans how this incredible tradition is continued and to be passed on to generations. I mean, Charlie Gabriel's is from he's a 4th generation musician. And there's actually 7 generations of Gabriels playing music in New Orleans.
Congratulations. Yeah, that is awesome. I'm sure it's evolved, it's changed, but you want to keep it as real as it's been since.
Well, you got to keep the soul of it,
yes.
I mean, when we travel, one of the first things people want to do is bring us to a local New Orleans style restaurant. And like the worst thing no offense to anybody. I mean, no offense to anybody, but all of us up here are cooks. We all come from a family of cooks. And
the food and the music runs deep back home.
Yeah, well, and that speaks a lot about how deeply we value our certain values, and food is part of our cultural tradition in New Orleans as well. But the idea is that there's only so many things that you can add to red beans and rice or take away from it. I mean, you can't just call it red beans and rice, and it's red beans and rice. You know what I mean? Right. And sometimes it comes in, I'm like, that's not red beans and rice. That's chili. So you have to discover what the soul of that is. You know what I mean? Yeah. And one of the things that runs through our music is the DNA of the very origins of New Orleans music.
Let's talk about this new album. It was inspired in part by taking a trip to Cuba. Take us through that process.
Well, we were invited to perform at the Havana Jazz Festival, and this was before the embargo was lifted. So we began the process of figuring out how we were going to get to Cuba, and we were working with some people who were going to arrange visas through a cultural exchange. We ended up in the midst of that process, the embargo was lifted, and we were faced with another challenge, and that was just how are we going to just get us down to Cuba, and how are we going to figure out the logistics of all of this. And it took us 2 years to raise the funds. Our foundation raised the funds to get us down there, and we brought an entourage with us of 150 of our closest supporters who helped fund our trip to Cuba. And once we were there, we had one of the most incredible experiences. I would say perhaps one of the most important musical experiences of my life, and for I could speak for a lot of the guys in the band. It was really transformative. We knew what we were walking into, but none of us had ever been before. And it's just interesting that the only reference we had were, records, that music we had heard or stories we had heard from other people. So it had this mystery, the same mystery that I kind of feel like New Orleans has for a lot of people, and maybe had for my parents when they first got there in 1961. And going down there and meeting our counterparts, our musical counterparts, and just knowing the strong ties between New Orleans and Cuba, and people don't always realize exactly how close New Orleans is to Cuba. Going back a couple hundred years, everything came through New Orleans. Everything had to be shipped through New Orleans. The Mississippi River was the gateway to the United States. The whole middle of the country. Everything came through Cuba and came up through New Orleans. It came through Haiti, Cuba, New Orleans. That was the trade route. And that not just, it wasn't just a trade route. I mean, that was also how, many of our traditions, got from point A to point B. I mean, we went to Cuba. A lot of times we just felt like we were home. People would come up and start talking to us in Spanish because, they just figured we were locals, Yeah. And it felt like that. It felt very familiar to us.
That is such a. We could talk shop for a really long time.
Yeah, because I mean, at the end of the day, it was like it had such an impact on us that we actually began writing songs while we were there in Cuba. Mm-hmm. And some of the songs just kind of happened like right on the spot. Just a moment we would be on the middle of finished with jamming with some musicians somewhere, and we'd be out in the middle of the street, and all of a sudden we'd break into a song almost spontaneously. And in fact, that song Santiago came about as a result of our trip to Santiago and our interactions with a group of percussionists that we met down there.
We are in the presence of greatness today. Do you guys realize how lucky you are? Thank you so much, you guys, for taking time out for us.
Do we have time for another one?
Yeah. I'm going to shut up. We want you to play a couple more.
All right.
Yeah. They're at the Aladdin Theater tonight. I think it's sold out, but maybe if you know the right people, you might be able to get in. I don't know who you know. Aladdin Theater tonight. So It Is the new album. It's out this Friday. Preservation Hall Jazz Band, everybody. Once again, make some noise. Thanks, you guys.